Hello and welcome to a quick soldering video from RC Empire. As some of you may have seen in our last video, we installed the new Turnigy ESC into our Lossy Mini 8, which was a complete success. What we didn't show you, however, was a swapping of the factory fitted battery connector to a DIN one. And that's what we'll be showing you in this video today, and hopefully showing you a good easy way to solder DINs. So let's get started. What we have here is our new Turnigy Trackstar 30 amp ESC, which you can see a full unboxing of in our last video. We have our new DIN plug, which we'll be installing, and we have our gas soldering iron from Dremel, which I really recommend. It is a great tool to have out in the field or at home. Now the first thing to do is to remove the old connector. You can just cut it off, but this will mean losing some of the length of the wire, and by removing the connector properly, it means you can reuse it later on. Also, not cutting the wire means that the ends of the wire should already be prepared for us to solder straight onto the DIN connector. So, with this connector, if we pull the back section off, you can see we have these wires soldered onto the back of the banana terminals. You can also see there is a little positive and negative sign there, so always make sure you have the polarities correct when you go to solder any electronics or batteries. In this case, the black wire is our negative and the red wire is our positive, and this is the case with the majority of RC systems as well as our LiPo battery and most other RC batteries. Now to remove the old connector, we're going to hold it in place with this little set of drawers. You can pick these up for around £5 and they are a massive help when soldering. Next, we want to heat up our soldering iron and just touch it onto the soldered connection, and the wires should just pull off. Importantly, you do not want to keep the iron on there for too long, because it may heat up and damage the plastic casing of the wire, and it should only take a few seconds with a hot iron. I am doing it at a bit of an awkward angle around the camera, but you get the idea. And this is the old connector, which you can use again later on. So next, we are going to connect the DIN, and again double check your polarities before you secure everything into place. What I like to do is keep both halves of the DIN connected while soldering. This helps dissipate heat through the DIN and take heat away from plastic, which with DINs is very important because they are very easy to melt, and I have gone through quite a lot of them by melting them. If you heat the metal terminal for too long, the plastic around them will begin to melt and the terminals will move out of position, and at this stage you'll probably need a new connector. Having the second connector on there also keeps the metal terminal in place if it does start to melt a little around the edges and want to move around. Next, remember to put a bit of heat shrink tubing on the wires before you solder them onto the DIN. This is very important to shield the terminals later on. And again, make sure you don't keep the heat on the wire for too long, or you will heat up the wire and shrink the tubing before you get it over the terminal. So put your wire and DIN into the holder and you're ready to start soldering. Now the trick is to apply the heat to the terminal for as little time as possible, and the best way I've found to do this is to quickly apply solder to the metal DIN terminal and then to the wire separately, and then quickly connect the two together later on. Otherwise you'll be trying to heat up the wire and the metal terminal at the same time whilst applying solder to them, whereas it's just easier to have the solder already on the two parts and quickly melt them together. Now I know a lot of solder wire comes with flux already inside the rod, but I still like to put a bit onto the terminals and onto any surface I will be applying solder to. And with that done, all you need to do is get your soldering iron, heat up the terminal and apply the solder. Remember, you are trying to heat up the surface that you are applying the solder to, and then melt the solder onto that surface, and that is the same for the terminals and the wires. If the surface is cold and you just melt the solder, it won't stick and flow onto the surface. And you also just want a very small amount on there. You really don't need a lot of it, and if you put too much, it will be harder to get the heat shrink tubing over and it might look messy. Now luckily, the wires are already soldered on, but to solder them, if we didn't have them prepared, you would just strip the end of the wire, twist the end of the wire so it's kind of braided together, heat up the wires with some flux on them, and then apply the solder as we did with the DIN terminals, so that all the wires are nicely coated. Now with both the wires and the terminals soldered, use your clamping tool to hold both sides together, heat up your soldering iron and just touch the tip of the iron between the two parts, and it will melt almost instantaneously, holding the two parts together. And that's it, you have a solid soldered connection. And you can see, because we used minimal solder, it's nice and neat. Now we need to do the same with the other side, and I am trying to do it around the camera. It wasn't quite as neat as I wanted, and I melted one of the corners, but it's okay. Just a 2-second touch with the iron between both sides and you're done. All that's left to do now is put the heat shrink tubing over the terminals. Get a little heat gun or a jet lighter and heat the tube to shrink around the terminals. And actually what you might want to do, and what I forgot to do, is put a bigger heat shrink tubing over both wires to hold them together and make everything look a lot neater. And it is essential that you put something to shield the terminals and make sure there is no exposed wire or metal, because when a battery is attached, if something metal touches both sides of the terminals and bridges them, you might get big sparks and shorting of the circuit, which is why you always put the female plug on the battery, because the terminals aren't exposed and can't touch each other. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video and picked up a few new things. If you have any questions, drop us a comment below or email us, and please rate and subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you soon.